Hello, everyone. I'm so honored to be invited as a speaker here for the first time. Welcome to Abiotic Factor, Accessibility Design, Methodologies, and Breaking New Ground quietly for Misophonia mode. In this talk, I'll be sharing some of my experiences and lessons learned during the process of designing and implementing accessibility features in Abiotic Factor. I'll also be covering Abiotic Factor's unique implementation of an uncommonly seen accessibility setting, Misophonia mode, and how it resulted in a few very unexpected but touching outcomes. Full disclosure, this talk is a mixture of both my own personal experiences as well as those more specific to the game itself. Quick content warning, I briefly reference mental health a couple of times, and a few sections contain some details on the harmful impact resulting from the lack of understanding and awareness of misophonia. If you'd like to avoid these topics, I completely understand. Those topics don't start right away, so you have a bit of time to step out before I get there. Before I begin, let me introduce myself and tell you a bit about my studio and our current project. My name is Kate. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the QA and accessibility director with Deep Field Games, an indie studio based in southern New Zealand. I'm one of the company directors and co-founded the studio alongside some very talented individuals back in September 2021. So a quick happy 4th birthday to Deep Field Games. The image at the bottom left of the slide is a 2-letter version of our company logo. The letter D is in white and the letter F is in red with a black background. This logo will be present on all presentation slides in the same location. I'm excited to share what we've achieved with our current project, Abiotic Factor, otherwise known as ABF, which is an alternate take on the survival crafting genre. Instead of chopping trees out in nature, you're a scientist crafting gadgets and tools out of office supplies. The image at the top left is the game's logo, with a bubbling yellowy-orange test tube on the left of teal stylized letters that spell out Abiotic Factor. To give a proper introduction, I'll read the official summary from the Steam store page. Abiotic Factor is a survival crafting experience for 1 to 6 players set in the depths of an underground research facility. Caught between paranormal containment failure, a military crusade, and chaos from a dozen realms, the world's greatest minds must survive against the universe's biggest threats. ABF was first released into early access on Steam in May 2024. Our 1.0 launch in July 2025 was a multi-platform release, which included PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S with crossplay support. We're all so happy to see such a positive reception to ABF and are blown away at what the game has achieved so far. A few examples that I'd like to share are here on screen. The first one being, ABF has maintained an overwhelmingly positive review score on Steam throughout the duration of early access, as well as through the release of 1.0. Upon release, the game received a 92 review score from PC Gamer, and Abiotic Factor was a finalist in 4 categories for the PAVs, the New Zealand Game Awards, and ended up winning in 2 of those categories. We were a finalist in A Poetic Serving, Excellence in Narrative, the Accessible Ambrosia, Excellence in Accessibility, and we wound up winning the Perfect Recipe, Excellence in Design, and the Slice of Heaven Grand Prize. Working on ABF has been so wild and such a blast. I'm very proud of our amazing team and grateful for all the people who have helped get the game to where it's at today. We're going to start by talking about valuing effort and how it can create an even bigger impact. Responsibility versus resources. One of my core held beliefs is that every game developer has the responsibility of making their games as accessible as they're able to with the resources that they have available. I want to put a huge emphasis on the second half of this statement about resources. Resources can include things like time, money, bandwidth, staffing, etc. The reality is that not every studio is going to be able to implement a huge array of accessibility features and settings into their games. And that's okay, even if it doesn't always feel okay. This was something that I personally had a very hard time with, especially early on in development. It was really tough for me to be able to accept that there was only so much we could do with the resources we had, as I just wanted to be able to do more. I felt incredibly conflicted. I knew everyone was working hard and doing their best. I knew that we were already working bits of accessibility improvements into each update. And I knew how important it was to properly balance all the other parts of development in order to keep things flowing and our staff paid. Despite all of that, I still struggled to deal with the guilt eating me up inside. In retrospect, this definitely all sounds quite overdramatic, but in the moment, I felt like a failure for not doing enough, and I didn't know what to do. Now, don't get the wrong impression here. I am incredibly proud of all the accessibility features and settings our team has worked hard to implement into Abiotic Factor so far. There is a lot there to celebrate, especially for a small team, and I'm so grateful for all that we've achieved together. I needed to reframe the entire situation so that I could look at it from an alternate perspective. Feeling perpetually guilty over something outside of my control was not sustainable, nor was it good for my mental health. Genuine effort equals impact. It didn't come to me right away, but over time I slowly began to see the value in the effort itself. I finally realized that making a genuine and continued effort, even with limited resources, makes a much greater impact than I had initially assumed. That effort is seen and appreciated by players. That effort is seen by other developers who may feel inspired to do the same. That effort demonstrates that you care enough to try and keep trying. There will always be someone that you just can't please, but you can't get discouraged or let that stop you from trying. Managing your expectations. As part of this, I also had to get my expectations in check and properly aligned with the capacity of our resources. We were continually making progress in improving accessibility, but I was so fixated on the distance between us and some arbitrary goal of being, quote, good enough, fast enough, that I failed to look back and see how far we've already come. It's important to take a moment to remind yourself that baby steps are still steps. No matter how small they may seem, they add up over time faster than you'd expect. If you're still taking those steps, you're still making progress, even if it's hard to see it at that moment. As my perspective started to shift to this new mindset, the once overwhelming guilt began to feel lighter. I can't say that all my guilt is gone, as I'm the type of person that feels guilty receiving a massage that I am paying for from someone who literally does this for a living. Because dang, that looks like hard work. In terms of my professional guilt, it's something I continue to manage with a constant cycle of reminding myself of all that we have achieved while looking for opportunities to work on making Abiotic Factor even more accessible. Learning to see the value in effort itself and managing expectations were two very important lessons, but they were only part of the equation. This next part involves embracing iteration and realizing how accepting imperfection builds a foundation for greater things. Iteration versus perfectionism. Iteration is a fantastic repeating process that uses information learned from each version to improve upon the next. This methodology isn't new, but it can be very difficult to use if you've got a bit of the perfectionist curse. Early on, during the initial accessibility design and implementation cycle, I felt a tremendous amount of pressure to get things just right from the start. Where did all this pressure come from? Well, me. I desperately wanted to do right by the community and make a positive impact, while also being absolutely terrified of getting it wrong or not being good enough. In tandem with my eventual realization on the value in effort, it took accepting some hard truths to help me loosen my white-knuckled grip on the goal of perfection. You're not going to always be able to implement everything exactly the way you originally designed. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you have to make compromises or concessions, but other times you may get an idea from someone or receive feedback from a player that ends up shaping the feature into something even better than you imagined. Know when it's time to say, it's good enough, and let go. Constantly chasing perfection does more harm than good and only hinders your progress. Unexpected resource constraints are going to happen. Learn to be okay with a simpler version of a feature than you had originally planned for. You may get the chance to improve it later on, but don't always count on it. Even with the absolute best intentions, you are going to make mistakes. Use every single mistake as an opportunity to learn and grow. There's nothing to be gained from beating yourself up over it. And now, while I say that I've accepted these, I'd be lying if I said I never experienced a particular situation where it was really difficult to continue accepting and following these. But when you identify that this is happening, being able to self-correct and redirect your line of thinking is tough, but it's an important skill to learn and nurture. There are greater gains in iteration than there is in perfectionism. However, letting go of your need for perfection is easier said than done. It's unrealistic to expect yourself to completely let go overnight. A more realistic first step is to allow yourself to start with just one thing that you know is less than perfect. Once you've given yourself this permission, you can begin to take advantage of all that iteration has to offer. Iteration is all about feedback, so ask for it often, early, and from everyone. Throughout the development of Abiotic Factor, we sought out feedback from a wide variety of sources, from players, members of the team, even developers from other studios. Whenever you solicit feedback from your player base, make it very easy for them to share it with you. Feedback forms with quick access links absolutely everywhere work great for this purpose. Had we not collected feedback like this, I truly believe that ABF would be a much different and honestly less great of a game in both accessibility and gameplay features. Sometimes the greatest ideas or valuable bits of information can come from where you least expect. Breaking new ground, quietly, for Misophonia mode, and how its unique implementation resonated with scientists everywhere. Now, to clear up any confusion, we typically refer to our players as scientists, particularly in any public communications, because you're a scientist. Before I talk about Misophonia mode and how it evolved in ABF over time, I want to do a quick informational overview. First, a quick note on what it's not. Misophonia is not just a dislike or a matter of preference to certain sounds. Misophonia is also not an issue with the volume of sound specifically, though from personal experience that can make the response to a trigger worse. Noting that that might just be me, others may feel the same. Here is the consensus definition of misophonia from a 2022 Delphi study. Misophonia is a disorder of decreased tolerance to specific sounds or stimuli associated with such sounds. These stimuli, known as triggers, are experienced as unpleasant or distressing and tend to evoke strong negative emotional, physiological, and behavioral responses that are not seen in most other people. Perception and awareness. Despite the fact that this condition affects as many as 1 in 5 adults, it's not often taken into consideration in terms of accessibility options. From my own perspective, there are two primary reasons for this. The first reason is that misophonia itself is often very misunderstood and viewed as someone being, quote, overdramatic or too sensitive over nothing. This causes frustration and shame in afflicted individuals over something outside of their control. The second reason is that many people don't really know what misophonia even is in the first place, including those who actually have the condition but haven't been diagnosed. Trying to cope with a condition you don't even know exists in the first place can be incredibly isolating and stressful. Standard misophonia mode. When misophonia mode is implemented, it's almost always only for eating and drinking sound effects. While these are the most common misophonia triggers, they aren't the only ones. But that isn't really commonly known. Now, while I say only, I absolutely am not devaluing the effort put in to implement the setting in the first place. As I talked about earlier, it's so important to see the value in the effort itself. The fact that this condition was considered and an effort was made in being accommodating is incredibly important. Before I continue, I'd like to note that further uses of sound effects in the slides will be shortened to SFX to conserve space. Initial implementation. When we first implemented misophonia mode in Abiotic Factor, we also started with just eating and drinking sound effects. It was a rudimentary implementation where if the misophonia mode bool was set to true, all sound effects on consumable items, regardless of the type or purpose, would be muted. This blanket approach only solved some of the issues, as there were more triggering sounds in the game not related to eating or drinking. This implementation gave us no flexibility in addressing more trigger sounds, as we couldn't just shove a ton of different sounds under the one toggle without causing problems. As someone who has misophonia, I know it affects different people in different ways. While there may be some overlap, not everyone with the condition has the same array of triggers. I felt stuck and wasn't sure how to best address the issue at the time. I kept it at the back of my mind while we continued to collect and assess player feedback on the setting's initial implementation. Misophonia mode version 1. As seen here in this image, this was our initial implementation of misophonia mode. Now, I don't work with blueprint code in my day-to-day, so please forgive any unofficial terminology I may use as I describe the image. On the top row, from left to right, the red event use item local fx node connects to a gray branch node. This branch node has one condition on the right and two outputs on the left, true and false. There is nothing connected to the true output. The false output connects to a blue play sound 2D mode with an eat chips sound cue set. On the bottom row, from left to right, the green get game instance node connects to the teal cast to abiotic game instance node. The game instance target is the red abiotic factor condition, which is set as the gray branch node's condition just above. With this setup, if misophonia mode was enabled in the gameplay settings, no sound effect would play as there's nothing connected to the true output on the branch node. If misophonia mode is disabled, sound effects would play as the false output on the branch node is actually connected to a play sound node. An unfortunate mistake. During this period of collecting player feedback to assess, there were some questions from players as to what exactly misophonia mode did. As you can imagine, I was very excited to see the interest and had replied to explain that it primarily covered eating and drinking sounds, noting it was not final at the time. I'll be using player feedback to help shape future changes, and that I can't guarantee all reported sounds will be included. Unfortunately, there was something we didn't account for that caused some problems. There were lip smacking sounds in 4 lines of dialogue that played when the player character was thirsty. A couple of players who played the game together were really upset by this and left some pretty harsh negative Steam reviews, claiming that the misophonia mode was false advertising, citing the lip smacks specifically. While I understood that they were frustrated, I myself was also frustrated because our intent to help has always been genuine, and the accusation of being deceptive honestly really sucked. When it was pointed out to us, we tried to figure out the best way to handle it, but unfortunately, there just wasn't a best case scenario solution. The problem came down to this. Since the lip smacking was part of player dialogue lines and not individual sound effects, it just wasn't possible for us to include those in misophonia mode. It wasn't the most ideal, but we ended up just editing each of the 4 player dialogue files themselves to cut out the lip smacks. This also caused other players who enjoyed those sounds to complain a bit, but at that point, it was just the best that we could do. There was a bit of a resolution to this whole situation, however. While I was preparing for this talk, I went to reread everything as a refresher since this had happened about a year and a half ago, and I was surprised at what I saw. Both of their reviews were gone. Gotta admit that I respect the fact that they took their reviews down after I assumed they saw that we removed the lip smacking sound. I wasn't expecting that. What makes it even better is that both players have continued to play ABF and weren't turned off for good. One player put in nearly 200 more hours since their negative review, and the other put in over 650 more hours, with nearly 70 hours over the first 2 weeks of September. It was really nice to see that they'd returned to play more and seemed to be enjoying it based on the hours that they've been putting in. So I'm always in favor of good ending. An improvement opportunity. For this next part, I need to give a bit of background. During pre-early access development in 2023, the game code had changed, which required removing the local misophonia check in order to ensure functionality of other sounds in game. This prompted the need for reevaluation of the misophonia setting and its entire implementation for a better long-term solution. Two programmers on the team, shout out to Zag and Jacob, came up with the idea of putting all the misophonia trigger sounds in their own sound effects subclass and suggested the use of a slider or simple bool. These two ideas sparked a bit of inspiration on my side, so I began some deep research into misophonia between my other dev tasks and continued researching through the release of Early Access in 2024. Misophonia Mode version 2. We ended up creating multiple sound subclasses, some with additional subclasses of their own. This made it easier for us to more specifically categorize individual sound files for everything in game, not just for misophonia. As seen here in this image, this is the second version of misophonia mode that was implemented after the code change. The flow is set up like an umbrella in 3 levels, where the top affects everything below, but each type can still be adjusted independently of each other. From left to right, the first node is the Abiotic Master Parent Sound class. All audio is set up as children or subclasses under this Parent Sound class node. Connected to the Parent Sound class node are 4 more nodes, each for a different type of subclass: sound effects, dialogue, music, and ambient. Then connected to the sound effects node is just one subclass from that node for misophonia. Misophonia research results. The research that I did taught me so much more about the condition outside of my own lived experience with it. While reading a study on the most common trigger sounds, the idea finally came to me: categories. Instead of one generic toggle, we could create categorized groups for different types of trigger sounds. New misophonia categories. Due to time and resource constraints, we needed to set a reasonable limit on the number of categories to work with and decided on 5. These are eating and drinking sound effects. These are sounds associated with eating and drinking, such as slurping, gulping, crunching, and chewing. Breathing sound effects. In our case specifically, this applies to the enclosed space breathing sound effect that plays while wearing full body suits. Humming sound effects. These are sounds associated with running devices or lights, such as fluorescent lights, air conditioners, fans, or electrical transformers. High-pitched sound effects. These include high-pitched or particularly sharp sounds, such as metal squeaks, electrical beeps, certain alarms, etc. Then, repetitive sound effects. This applies to repeating patterns or continual tapping sounds, such as Geiger counter clicks, water faucet drips, beeping, etc. As the dev on the team with misophonia, I was the best person to take on the task of listening to all of these sound effect files and assigning them the corresponding misophonia category if applicable. It was definitely not an easy task, to say the least, but it was still rewarding to me in the end. I've since written a work guide to help others on the team know when to classify a sound effect under a specific misophonia category, but I still offer a second opinion if needed. Once all the sounds were sorted, we released this huge change with our community update number 2 in September 2024. Current Misophonia setup. To help visualize how we've set this up on the back end, I've put together an example here on screen. Please note that the positioning of these nodes has been adjusted to better fit the presentation slide for readability and demonstrate further on how other sounds are set up. As seen in the image, we kept the 3 levels of sound classes and subclasses from the previous version, following the umbrella-like flow, with some changes and additions. From left to right, the first node is the Abiotic Master Parent Sound class. Connected to the parent sound class are 2 different sound subclass nodes, Abiotic Sound Effects and Abiotic Music. There are additional strings coming out of the Abiotic Master Parent Sound class node that flow straight down and end at the edge of the image. It's not pictured here, but these other strings are connected to additional sound subclass nodes, such as dialogue, ambient, NPCs, etc. From the Abiotic Sound Effects subclass node in the middle of the image, there are 6 connected sound subclass nodes: eat, drink, breathing, humming, high pitch, repetitive, and footsteps. All of these except for the footsteps subclass that I just listed account for the replacement of the generic Misophonia subclass node. Gained flexibility and control. This overhaul allows us, as well as our players, to take a huge first step in gaining a tremendous amount of flexibility and control over how and when different sound effects play. Players can now adjust the volume of a wide variety of different sound types independently of each other to further customize the soundscape to their needs and preferences. My hope is to see Misophonia settings like this appear in more and more games going forward. Positive community reception. After we had released our upgraded version of Misophonia mode, we received so many wonderful comments from the community about it. Players shared that they were so happy to discover that ABF has this accessibility setting built in, as they usually have to use mods to remove or mute triggering sounds in most other games. Many players with tinnitus or who are migraine prone have reached out to express that certain sounds would trigger or worsen their symptoms, and the ability to turn down or mute those sounds allows them to play for longer. There were also some comments from players with autism, noting that these new options were helpful in reducing or preventing sensory triggers and overload while playing. I have a player comment on this that I want to share here on screen that I'll read aloud. Thank you so much for the Misophonia options. The sensory sensitivity part of my autism is really intense sometimes, and some games are genuinely difficult for me to play because of the sound effects in them. Thank you for not forgetting us. Ugh. Apologies, I've practiced this so many times, but I can't not get choked up over that part. Oh, I had to share that, of course. Moving on. Some particularly touching notes also came from players, some particularly touching notes came from players explaining that since they discovered the Misophonia settings, they finally have a word to explain why certain sounds affect them negatively, as they'd never heard of Misophonia before now. Quick important disclaimer, I want to press pause here for a moment to emphasize that obviously we aren't doctors. We as game developers absolutely cannot diagnose people nor give medical advice. However, An additional benefit to implementing misophonia mode is that it raises awareness of the condition itself. A person who thinks that they might be experiencing misophonia symptoms could then consult with a professional to determine if this is the case for them. From personal experience, it can be so distressing and isolating, trying to deal with something you and everyone around you just can't understand. Words can't quite encapsulate what it feels like to finally have a name to identify the culprit that's been causing you grief all this time. Once you know what it is, it's easier to give yourself some grace and compassion as you learn how to better manage it going forward. If by raising awareness, I can help someone out there who is in that same position, I'll jump at the opportunity any day. Whew. All right, so now I would like to wrap up by doing a quick review of a few takeaways from this talk. Takeaways and reminders, part 1 of 2. Do your best with what resources you have and keep your expectations realistic. Genuine and continued effort demonstrates that you care enough to try, and that goes a long way with players and other devs alike. Embracing iteration and regular feedback over perfection gives much bigger gains. Takeaways and reminders, part 2 of 2. Manage community expectations. Open communication with your community where appropriate goes a long way, but be mindful of how you phrase things. The learning process has no end. While you may reach a point where you feel like the expert for your team or studio, don't stop your pursuit of knowledge, as there's always more to learn. Learning about the reasons why players use certain accessibility settings will help guide more impactful improvements. Misophonia settings don't just benefit those with that disorder. Accommodations like this can make a huge difference for a lot more people than you expected. And that is it from me. Thank you everyone so much. In case you missed the beginning or just plain forgot, I totally get it. My name is Kate. I'm the QA and Accessibility Director with Deep Field Games, and our current project is Abiotic Factor. Thank you everyone for tuning in, either virtually or in person. It's been an honor to share my experiences with you all today. Please remember to practice self-care and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much, everyone.